For 12 years, I poured my heart, soul, and every penny I had into raising Marcus like he was my own son. I worked double shifts, skipped meals, and sacrificed my own dreams just to give him the future he deserved. But the day of his college graduation, when he introduced me to his friends as just the babysitter, I knew it was time to stop being the woman who got walked all over. What he didn't know was that I'd been quietly building something that would change everything, and this time, I was going to make sure he understood exactly what he'd thrown away. It all started when Marcus was 6 years old. His mother, Rebecca, was my younger sister. Brilliant, beautiful, but completely irresponsible. She'd gotten pregnant in college, dropped out, and spent the next few years bouncing between deadbeat boyfriends and get-rich-quick schemes. I was 28 then, working as a nurse at the local hospital, living in a modest apartment, trying to build my own life after my own recent breakup with a guy who couldn't handle my dedication to my career. That Tuesday evening in November, Rebecca showed up at my door with Marcus in tow. The rain was pelting down, and both of them were soaked through. Marcus's little sneakers squelched with every step, and his thin jacket was doing nothing to keep him warm. He was clutching a worn, stuffed elephant, his lips slightly blue from the cold, looking up at me with those enormous brown eyes that seemed to hold too much sadness for a 6-year-old. Rebecca didn't even bother with pleasantries or small talk. She'd gotten some amazing opportunity in California, she explained breathlessly, pushing her wet hair out of her face. Some guy named Trevor had connections in the entertainment industry and thought she could really make it as an actress. This could be her big break, the one she'd been waiting for her entire life. She just needed someone to watch Marcus for a few months while she got established out there, maybe a year at most. She couldn't drag a 6-year-old to auditions and networking events and industry parties, could she? It wouldn't be fair to him or to her career. I looked down at Marcus, who was staring up at me with those big brown eyes, shivering despite trying to be brave about the cold, and the situation he clearly didn't fully understand. His stuffed elephant was as wet as he was, and I could see him trying not to cry. When he asked in his small voice if I was going to take care of him, my heart melted completely. This wasn't his fault. He didn't ask for any of this chaos. For a mother who saw him as an obstacle to her dreams rather than her greatest blessing and responsibility. Of course I would take care of him, I told him, kneeling down to his level and helping him out of his soaked jacket. We were going to have so much fun together. I'd make him hot chocolate with extra marshmallows, and we'd find some dry clothes and maybe watch a movie. Rebecca's face lit up with relief so obvious it was almost painful to witness. She'd send money when she could, she promised, though her track record with promises wasn't exactly stellar. She'd call all the time and maybe even video chat so Marcus could see her. This was just temporary, she insisted, just until she got her first real role and could afford a place big enough for both of them. Once she made it big, they'd live in a beautiful house in Hollywood with a swimming pool and everything. But I already knew better. I'd been cleaning up Rebecca's messes our entire lives, from the time she was 14, and got caught shoplifting to when she was 22, and needed bail money after a drunk driving incident. She had a pattern of making grand promises and then disappearing when things got difficult or when something more exciting came along. The difference was, this time, it wasn't just her life she was walking away from. It was Marcus's entire world. That first night, after Rebecca had driven away in her beat-up Honda Civic with its rattling muffler and duct-taped bumper, I sat watching Marcus sleep on the pull-out bed I'd hastily assembled in my living room. I'd given him my softest pajamas, which were still too big for his small frame, and made him that promised hot chocolate with extra marshmallows. His little chest rose and fell peacefully, that stuffed elephant tucked securely under his arm like a lifeline. Looking at him sleeping there, so small and vulnerable and trusting, I made a promise to myself that would shape the next 12 years of my life. No matter what Rebecca did or didn't do, I would make sure this little boy had everything he needed. He would never feel abandoned again, never wonder if he was loved, never go to bed hungry or cold or afraid. The calls from Rebecca lasted about 3 weeks, which was actually longer than I'd expected based on her previous patterns. At first, she'd call every few days, her voice bright and optimistic and full of the kind of manic energy she got when she thought she was on the verge of something big. She'd asked to talk to Marcus and promised she'd be back soon, spinning elaborate stories about auditions and callbacks and important people she was meeting. She was going to be a movie star, she told him, and when she made it big, they'd live in a beautiful house with a swimming pool and maybe even a tennis court. Marcus would cling to every word, asking me constantly when Mommy was coming back, if she really was going to be famous, if they'd really have a swimming pool. Then the calls became weekly, shorter and less focused on Marcus and more on Rebecca's growing list of complaints about how hard the industry was, how expensive Los Angeles was, how Trevor wasn't being as helpful as he'd promised. The stories started to change too. Suddenly the auditions weren't going as well. The callbacks weren't materializing, and the important people weren't returning her calls. Marcus started asking fewer questions about when she was coming back, started running to the phone less eagerly when it rang. Then it was every 2 weeks, then once a month, then nothing at all. When I tried calling her number 6 weeks after her last call, it was disconnected. The automated message informed me that the number was no longer in service, and there was no forwarding information available. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach, though part of me had been expecting this moment since the day she'd left. I hired a private investigator 8 months later, partly to make sure she was alive and partly so I'd have some kind of answer when Marcus inevitably asked more questions about his mother. The investigator found her easily enough. She was living in Las Vegas with some new boyfriend named Rick, working as a cocktail waitress at one of the smaller casinos off the Strip. When the investigator approached her about Marcus, she'd flipped her bleached hair and said she was still getting her life together and would come back for him when the timing was right. She was thinking about taking some acting classes and maybe trying to get into some local theater productions. The timing just wasn't right yet for a kid, she'd explained, as if Marcus was a pet she could pick up when convenient. The timing was never right for Rebecca. It never would be. Meanwhile, I was learning how to be a parent overnight, and it was simultaneously the most challenging and rewarding experience of my life. Getting Marcus enrolled in the local elementary school meant navigating a bureaucratic maze of custody paperwork, medical records, and proof of residence. I had to obtain legal guardianship, which involved court dates and lawyers and social workers asking probing questions about Rebecca's abandonment and my ability to provide a stable home environment. Finding reliable after-school care for the days I worked late shifts was another challenge entirely. Most programs were expensive, and Marcus was shy and sensitive about being the kid whose mom had gone away to become a movie star. I finally found a wonderful older woman named Mrs. Chen who ran a small daycare out of her home. She charged reasonable rates and genuinely cared about the children in her care. Marcus loved her immediately, and she became like a grandmother to him, always asking about his day at school and helping him with homework when I was stuck at work. Attending parent-teacher conferences was an adventure in learning how to advocate for Marcus and understand the education system. I had to learn about reading levels and standardized test scores and homework policies. His first-grade teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, was incredibly kind and patient with both of us, understanding that we were both adjusting to a new family dynamic. The nightmares were perhaps the hardest part of those early years. Marcus would wake up crying, asking if I was going to leave him too, if I was going to go to California to be a movie star like his mommy had. I'd sit with him for hours, rubbing his back and telling him stories and promising him over and over that I wasn't going anywhere. I'd explain that some people just aren't ready to be parents, but that didn't mean anything was wrong with him. Sometimes he'd ask if he was too much trouble, if that's why his mommy had to leave, and those questions would break my heart into a million pieces. But there were beautiful moments too, moments that made all the challenges worthwhile. Marcus was such a bright, curious kid with an insatiable appetite for learning. He loved science experiments, and we'd spend Saturday mornings making volcanoes in the kitchen sink or growing crystals on string suspended in jars of salt water. He was fascinated by how things worked, always asking why the sky was blue or how airplanes stayed in the air or what made flowers bloom. He'd build elaborate Lego structures that would take over the entire living room, castles and spaceships and entire cities, with intricate road systems and bridges. He'd spend hours on these projects, his little tongue poking out in concentration, explaining to me the purpose of every room and vehicle and character in his imaginary worlds. He'd help me make dinner every evening, standing on a little step stool to reach the counter, chattering about his day at school and the friends he was making. He'd tell me about the books Mrs. Rodriguez was reading to the class, about the art projects they were working on, about the playground dynamics and who was friends with whom. Those conversations over simple dinners of spaghetti or grilled cheese became some of my most treasured memories. When he was 8, something significant happened that changed our relationship forever. He started calling me Mom Sarah instead of Aunt Sarah, and the first time he did it, my heart nearly burst with joy and love. We were at the grocery store on a Saturday afternoon, and he'd wandered off to look at the toy aisle while I was comparing prices on cereal boxes. I turned around and he was gone, and for a moment I felt that familiar parent panic. Where is he? Is he safe? Did someone take him? Then I heard his voice from the next aisle over, excited and happy. Mom Sarah, come look at this cool robot. When I found him in the toy aisle, he was holding up a transformer with genuine excitement, completely oblivious to the fact that he'd just called me the most beautiful thing I'd ever been called. I knelt down to his level, my eyes filling with tears of joy and emotion. When I asked what he'd just called me, he looked suddenly uncertain, his smile fading as if he thought he might have done something wrong. He explained that Ashley at school had said her stepmom was like her real mom because she was the one who did all the mom things, helping with homework, making lunch, reading bedtime stories, taking care of her when she was sick. You do all the mom things for me, he said simply. So I thought maybe I could call you Mom Sarah. I pulled him into a tight hug, right there in the middle of the toy aisle, not caring who was watching or what they might think. Being his Mom Sarah was the most beautiful title I'd ever been given, I told him. I was honored and touched and so very happy that he felt that way about our relationship. From that day forward, I was Mom Sarah to everyone who mattered, to his teachers, to his friends' parents, to the other kids in the neighborhood. And when people asked about his father or his real mom, Marcus would explain matter-of-factly that his birth mom had to go away to pursue her dreams. But his Mom Sarah took care of him now and was the best mom in the world. By the time Marcus was 10, I'd legally adopted him through the court system. Rebecca never contested it. In fact, I'm not even sure she knew about the paperwork since she'd moved again by then. Her sparse social media posts showed she'd relocated to Florida, where she was engaged to some guy named Rick, who owned a boat rental business. The photos showed her with a deep tan and platinum blonde highlights, living what appeared to be her best life on various boats and beaches, always with a cocktail in her hand and a big smile on her face. Late at night, when I was paying bills and calculating how many overtime hours I'd need to pick up to afford school supplies or field trip fees or the class photos that Marcus was always excited about, I'd find myself wondering how she could just disappear from the most wonderful little boy in the world. How could she see the occasional photos I posted of his school plays and science fair projects and never comment, never reach out, never show any interest in the amazing child she'd thrown away like he was nothing? When Marcus started middle school, the questions about his mother became more complex and harder to answer. No longer the innocent "when is mommy coming back" inquiries of his early childhood, but deeper, more painful questions that showed his growing understanding of the situation. "Do you think she ever thinks about me?" he'd ask while we were doing homework together at the kitchen table. "If she thinks about me, why doesn't she call or write or even send a birthday card? Was I really that bad of a kid that she had to leave?" These conversations were heartbreaking, but I knew they were important. I'd explained that his mother's leaving wasn't about him. It was about her being unable to put anyone else's needs before her own wants and desires. Some people are so focused on what they think they need to be happy that they can't see what they already have, I'd tell him. His mother had problems that had nothing to do with him, and everything to do with her own inability to handle responsibility and commitment. When he'd say he felt like it was his fault, like maybe if he'd been a better kid she would have stayed, I'd make sure he understood that children are never responsible for their parents' choices. Adults make decisions based on their own character and priorities, and a parent who abandons a child is revealing something about themselves, not about the child they're leaving behind. I'm glad she left me with you instead of someone else, he'd often say during these conversations, and I was glad too, even though I knew it had been pure chance, rather than any thoughtful decision on Rebecca's part. Marcus had become the center of my world in the best possible way, the driving force behind every decision I made and every goal I set. When Marcus started high school, his academic potential became impossible to ignore. He was already talking about college with the kind of serious intensity that both impressed and slightly worried me. Straight A's every semester, on a roll consistently, captain of the debate team, president of the science club, volunteer tutor for younger students struggling with math and science. His guidance counselor, Mr. Patterson, called me in for a meeting during his sophomore year to discuss Marcus's exceptional potential and what that might mean for his future. Mr. Patterson explained that with Marcus's grades, test scores, and extracurricular activities, he could realistically apply to any university in the country. Harvard, Yale, Stanford, MIT. These weren't just pipe dreams, but actual possibilities if we could provide the right preparation and support. The conversation was exciting and terrifying at the same time, because I knew that kind of preparation would require resources I wasn't sure I could provide. The costs would be significant, Mr. Patterson warned me gently. SAT prep courses, college application coaching, potentially some summer enrichment programs that would strengthen his applications. There would be fees for taking standardized tests multiple times, application fees for multiple schools, travel costs for campus visits and interviews, and then, of course, there was the cost of college itself, which even with financial aid and scholarships could be overwhelming for a single parent on a nurse's salary. But looking at Marcus's transcript, seeing the obvious intelligence and drive that radiated from every grade and every teacher's comment, I realized Mr. Patterson wasn't being unrealistic. Marcus really could achieve anything he set his mind to. He had the brains, the work ethic, and the character to succeed at the highest levels. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of bills, trying to figure out how to make the impossible possible. My salary as a hospital nurse was decent, but not extraordinary, especially considering I was supporting 2 people and trying to save for the future. I had a small savings account that I contributed to when I could, but it wasn't nearly enough for the kind of college preparation and education Marcus deserved. That's when I made the biggest decision of my life, one that would define the next 4 years and change everything about how I lived. I started working nights at a second hospital across town, picking up weekend shifts whenever they were available, and taking on private duty cases during my vacation time. Instead of resting during my time off, I'd sit with elderly patients who needed round-the-clock care, earning extra money while providing comfort to people in their final days or weeks. I opened a dedicated college savings account and made a commitment to put every spare dollar into it. Money from overtime shifts, holiday bonuses, tax refunds, even the birthday money my parents sent me each year. The lifestyle changes were dramatic and immediate. I sold my reliable Honda Accord and bought a much cheaper used car with high mileage, a dented door, and a check engine light that seemed to come on every few months. I moved us from our comfortable 2-bedroom apartment into a smaller, cheaper 1-bedroom unit in a less desirable part of town. Marcus got the bedroom, and I set up a daybed in the living room that served as both my bedroom and our family room. I eliminated every luxury I could think of, scrutinizing every expense and cutting ruthlessly. No more takeout dinners or restaurant meals. I meal planned aggressively and cooked everything from scratch, buying ingredients in bulk and preparing large batches that we'd eat throughout the week. I canceled our cable TV subscription and relied on the library for entertainment and homework help. I stopped buying new clothes unless absolutely necessary, shopping exclusively at thrift stores and consignment shops and learning to hem and alter things myself to make them fit properly. I stopped getting my hair cut at a salon and learned to trim it myself using YouTube tutorials. I canceled my gym membership and started running in the neighborhood for exercise, sometimes with Marcus riding his bike alongside me. I stopped buying books and magazines, checking everything out from the library instead. I even learned to do my own basic car maintenance, changing oil and replacing air filters to save on mechanic costs. Marcus noticed the changes, of course. He was 14, not 4, and he could see that our lifestyle had shifted dramatically. He offered to get a part-time job to help with expenses, pointing out that lots of kids his age worked at fast food restaurants or grocery stores after school. But I refused absolutely. His job was to focus on school and his future, I told him firmly. I had this situation handled, and his only responsibility was to continue excelling academically and preparing for college. When he'd worry that I was always tired, working what seemed like 60 or 70 hours a week, never doing anything fun or relaxing, never going out with friends or dating or even just sleeping in on Saturday mornings, I'd reassure him that watching him succeed was all the entertainment I needed. And it was true, in a way that probably sounds crazy to people who haven't experienced it. Every parent-teacher conference, where his teachers praised his intelligence and character, every debate tournament he won, every time he came home excited about some new concept he'd learned in AP Biology or AP History, those moments made all the exhaustion and financial stress worthwhile. But the stress was real and relentless. Some nights I'd lie on my daybed calculating and recalculating numbers, trying to figure out how to make everything work financially. The college prep courses cost more than I made in a month. The SAT fees, the application fees, the potential travel costs for campus visits. It was all overwhelming when I looked at it as a total sum. I started picking up even more private duty cases, sitting with elderly patients overnight for families who needed a break from the constant vigilance required for dementia care or terminal illness. The work was emotionally draining but well paid, and it allowed me to earn money during hours when Marcus was sleeping and didn't need my attention. One of my regular patients was an elderly woman named Mrs. Montgomery, whose family hired me to stay with her 3 nights a week. She had Alzheimer's disease and got confused and agitated during the nighttime hours, sometimes forgetting where she was or trying to leave the house to go to jobs she'd had decades earlier. My role was to keep her calm and safe while her daughter got some desperately needed rest. Mrs. Montgomery had been a high school English teacher before her retirement, and during her lucid moments, she'd talk about education and the importance of giving young people opportunities to succeed. When I mentioned that I was putting Marcus through college preparation and eventually college itself, she was amazed by the scope of the sacrifice I was making. "That's real love," she said during one of our late-night conversations. "Not many people would sacrifice their own financial security and personal life for a child who isn't biologically theirs. But he is mine," I told her. "Not biologically, but in every way that matters. He's my son in every sense except DNA. "Does he appreciate what you're doing for him?" she asked. "He's a good kid," I replied. "He doesn't take it for granted. At least, I hoped he didn't." When college application time arrived during Marcus's senior year, we approached it strategically but ambitiously. We applied to reach schools like Harvard, Yale, Stanford, and MIT, but also to more realistic options like state universities, with strong pre-med programs that might be more affordable, even without full scholarships. Marcus had decided he wanted to become a doctor, specifically a pediatric surgeon. "I want to help kids like me," he explained. "Kids who need someone to fight for them and give them chances they wouldn't otherwise have." I helped him craft essay after essay, each one tailored to specific schools and programs. I drove him to interviews with local alumni associations, paying for gas and parking and professional clothes that he'd need to make good impressions. I paid for SAT prep courses even though it meant eating ramen noodles for dinner 4 nights a week and walking to work when my car was acting up to save on gas money. The application fees alone cost more than our monthly grocery budget, but I paid them without hesitation. This was Marcus's future we were investing in, and no cost was too high for that. The first acceptance letter came from our state university, offering Marcus a full scholarship that would cover tuition, room, and board. I cried with relief when we read that letter together. No matter what happened with the other schools, Marcus would be able to go to college and pursue his dreams. Then came acceptances from several other schools, each with different financial aid packages that I spent hours deciphering and comparing. Some offered partial scholarships, others offered need-based aid, and a few offered combinations that would still require significant family contributions. But the letter we were really waiting for came on a Tuesday afternoon in March that I'll remember for the rest of my life. Marcus burst through the front door of our small apartment, waving an envelope with familiar crimson letterhead, his face glowing with excitement and disbelief. "It's here," he shouted. "The Harvard letter. It finally came." We opened it together with hands that were literally shaking with nervousness and anticipation. "Dear Marcus," it began, "we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted to Harvard University's class of 2024. On behalf of the admissions committee, I congratulate you on your outstanding academic achievement and look forward to welcoming you to campus this fall." We both started screaming and crying at the same time, jumping up and down in our tiny living room like we'd won the lottery. In a way we had. This was the culmination of years of hard work, sacrifice, and determination. "You did it!" I sobbed, holding him tight. "You actually did it!" "We did it," he corrected, pulling back to look at me with tears streaming down his face. "I never could have done any of this without you, Mom Sarah. Never." Harvard's financial aid package was generous but not complete, as I'd expected. They calculated our family contribution at about $30,000 per year, which was more than half my annual salary before overtime. I had managed to save about half of that amount through my aggressive work schedule and lifestyle changes, but the rest would require taking out loans and continuing the exhausting pace I'd been maintaining. I didn't hesitate for even a second. This was Harvard we were talking about. This was Marcus's dream, and it was within reach. Those 4 years of Marcus being at Harvard were simultaneously the proudest and most physically and financially demanding of my life. I worked 70-hour weeks regularly, picking up every available overtime shift and holiday assignment for the time-and-a-half pay. I worked while other people spent Christmas with their families, while other people took vacations, while other people had social lives and hobbies and normal human experiences. I drove a car that probably should have been retired years earlier, with broken air conditioning that made summer driving miserable, a rattling muffler that announced my presence from blocks away, and a check engine light that had become a permanent fixture on the dashboard. I wore my nursing scrubs until they literally fell apart at the seams, then bought replacements at thrift stores and uniform exchanges. I lived on whatever was marked down for quick sale at the grocery store, becoming an expert at creating nutritious meals from the cheapest available ingredients. But through it all, I got to watch Marcus thrive in ways I had never imagined possible when he was that scared 6-year-old clutching his stuffed elephant. He called me every Sunday without fail during his first 2 years, his voice bright with excitement about his classes, his professors, the research projects he was beginning to get involved with. He'd joined the pre-med track as planned, and was considering specializing in pediatric surgery, just as he'd dreamed. "I want to help kids like me," he'd remind me. "Kids who need someone to believe in them and fight for their futures. Tell me about your classes," I'd say, settling in for our weekly phone conversations that became the highlight of my week. He'd describe organic chemistry labs and philosophy seminars and research opportunities with professors who were leaders in their fields. He'd talk about study groups and campus activities and the amazing library where he'd spend hours reading and researching. "Are you making good friends?" I'd ask. "Having any fun along with all that studying?" He'd tell me about his roommate David, who was majoring in classics and could quote ancient Greek philosophers, and about Jennifer, a brilliant pre-med student from a family of doctors who was also interested in pediatric cardiology. He'd describe campus traditions and social events and weekend trips into Boston with his new friends. I loved hearing about his life, his growing confidence and independence, his obvious joy in being challenged academically at the highest level. He made Dean's List every semester. He joined research groups and academic clubs. He was becoming the man I'd always hoped he could be, surpassing even my wildest dreams for his future. But the financial pressure was absolutely relentless and getting worse each year. There were unexpected expenses every semester that weren't covered by his aid package. Lab fees, technology requirements, books that cost hundreds of dollars each, special equipment for advanced courses. I drained my retirement account completely, cashed in the small life insurance policy my parents had left me, and took out loans against everything I owned. I stopped going to the dentist because I couldn't afford the appointments, reasoning that I was young and healthy and could delay non-emergency care. I postponed my own medical checkups and routine screenings, figuring I'd catch up on my own health care after Marcus graduated. I lived on over-the-counter pain relievers for the chronic back pain that came from working long shifts and sleeping on a daybed that wasn't designed for nightly use. My social life disappeared entirely. I couldn't afford to go out with coworkers for drinks or dinner, couldn't afford movies or concerts or even coffee dates. I spent my rare free time sleeping or doing laundry or catching up on household tasks I'd neglected while working around the clock. But every semester when Marcus called to tell me about his grades, every achievement he shared, every time I heard the confidence and happiness in his voice, I knew it was all worth it. This was what love looked like in action. Not just feelings or words, but concrete sacrifice and unwavering commitment to someone else's well-being and future. During his junior year, Marcus called with particularly exciting news that made all the exhaustion and financial stress feel meaningful. His organic chemistry professor, Dr. Chen, had invited him to co-author a research paper about congenital heart defects in underserved populations. If the paper was accepted for publication, it could significantly strengthen his medical school applications and potentially open doors to competitive research opportunities. Even more exciting, Doctor. Chen wanted Marcus to present their findings at a national pediatric cardiology conference the following spring. The idea of presenting medical research to hundreds of doctors and researchers was both thrilling and terrifying for him, but it represented the kind of opportunity that could shape his entire career. "Mom, Sarah," he said during that phone call, his voice filled with wonder and disbelief. 3 years ago, I was just a kid from a small town with big dreams. Now I might be presenting medical research at a national conference. I still can't believe this is my life. "You deserve all of this," I told him, meaning every word. "You've worked incredibly hard, and you've earned every opportunity that's come your way. I know how much you've sacrificed to make this possible," he replied. "I promise I'm going to make it worth it. I'm going to become the kind of doctor who makes a real difference in the world." I believed him completely. Everything about Marcus's character and dedication told me he would do exactly what he said, use his advantages and opportunities to help others, especially children who needed advocates and champions. As graduation approached, I found myself experiencing a complex mix of emotions. I was incredibly excited to see Marcus receive his Harvard diploma, to celebrate this amazing achievement we'd worked toward for so long. But I was also terrified about what came next financially. Medical school would be even more expensive than college, and I was already stretched beyond my limits with loans and debt. But I'd figure it out somehow. I always did. Marcus's future was worth any sacrifice I had to make. I bought a dress for his graduation ceremony, my first new piece of clothing in over 2 years. It was a simple navy blue sheath from a department store. Nothing fancy or expensive, but I had it tailored to fit perfectly so it would look more expensive than it was. I wanted to look presentable and proud. When my son received his Harvard degree, I drove the 400 miles to Boston in my reliable but aging Honda, which made concerning rattling noises for most of the trip, but somehow managed to get me there safely. I'd saved up enough money for gas and a one-night stay at a budget motel outside the city, carefully calculating every expense to make the trip possible without going further into debt. Harvard's campus was absolutely breathtaking in late spring. Everything I'd imagined and more. The historic brick buildings covered with ivy, the perfectly manicured lawns and gardens, the sense of history and academic achievement that seemed to emanate from every corner. Students in caps and gowns were everywhere, posing for photos with their families, laughing and hugging and celebrating their accomplishments. I felt an overwhelming sense of pride and accomplishment as I walked through that campus, knowing that Marcus belonged here, that somehow, against all odds, I'd managed to make this possible for him. After everything we'd been through together, the abandonment, the financial struggles, the years of sacrifice and hard work, he had earned his place at one of the most prestigious universities in the world. I spotted him near the science building, surrounded by a group of his classmates, all of them in their graduation regalia, looking confident and accomplished, and ready to take on the world. He looked so handsome and mature, so completely at home in this environment of excellence and achievement. The scared, abandoned 6-year-old with the stuffed elephant had grown into this poised, educated young man with unlimited potential. I approached the group with a huge smile on my face, my heart practically bursting with joy and pride and love. When I called his name and waved, he turned around and for just a split second, so brief I almost thought I'd imagined it, I saw something flicker across his face. Was it embarrassment? Discomfort? Annoyance? But then he smiled, though it seemed somehow forced and didn't quite reach his eyes the way his real smiles always did. "Oh, hey," he said, his tone strangely casual for such an important moment. "Everyone, this is Sarah." I waited for him to continue, to explain who I was, what our relationship was, why I was there. But he just stood there, saying nothing more, as if introducing me by first name only was sufficient explanation for my presence at his graduation. One of his classmates, a pretty blonde girl with perfect teeth, pearls, and the kind of confident bearing that suggested she'd grown up with money and privilege, stepped forward with a polite but curious smile. "Nice to meet you, Sarah," she said. "How do you know Marcus? Are you family?" I looked at Marcus expectantly, assuming he would explain our relationship, would tell his friends about the woman who'd raised him and sacrificed everything for his education. When he remained silent, I started to answer myself, opening my mouth to explain that I was his adoptive mother, the aunt who'd become his primary caregiver when his birth mother abandoned him. But before I could get the words out, Marcus cut me off abruptly. "She's just the babysitter," he said quickly, his voice dismissive and casual. "She used to watch me when I was a kid." The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest, so unexpected and painful that I actually felt dizzy for a moment. Just the babysitter. 12 years of raising him, loving him unconditionally, working myself to exhaustion to pay for his education, sacrificing my own financial security and personal life, and I was just the babysitter. The blonde girl nodded politely, her interest in me clearly waning now that she understood I was just hired help rather than actual family. "Oh, how sweet that you came to his graduation," she said in the kind of tone people use when they're trying to be nice to service workers. "You must have been like family to him growing up." "Something like that," Marcus replied with a shrug, already turning his attention back to his friends, as if I was no longer worth acknowledging. "Hey, we should probably head over to the ceremony area," he added. "Don't want to be late for the actual graduation." As the group started to move away, Marcus glanced back at me almost as an afterthought, the way you might acknowledge a distant acquaintance you'd run into unexpectedly. "Thanks for coming, Sarah," he said, his voice polite but distant. "It really means a lot that you made the trip." But his tone was formal and detached, like he was thanking a former teacher or neighbor rather than the woman who'd raised him, who'd worked 70-hour weeks to pay his tuition, who'd loved him as her own son for 12 years. I stood there in the middle of that beautiful campus, watching him walk away with his friends, his real friends, the ones who belonged in his new world of privilege and achievement, and felt something fundamental break inside my chest. All those years of him calling me Mom Sarah, all those moments when he told me he loved me and that I was the best mom in the world, all those promises that we were a team and that he'd never forget what I'd done for him. Had any of it been real? Or had I just been the convenient caretaker, useful until he no longer needed taking care of? I managed to get through the graduation ceremony somehow, sitting alone in the family section while parents around me beamed with pride and took endless photos of their graduates. When they called Marcus's name and he walked across the stage to receive his diploma, I clapped until my hands hurt and cried until my makeup ran down my cheeks. But they weren't tears of pure joy anymore. They were tears of pride mixed with grief, love mixed with betrayal, celebration mixed with the crushing realization that I'd somehow lost the most important person in my life. After the ceremony ended, I waited near the exit area, hoping Marcus would find me, hoping he'd want to take pictures together or go to dinner to celebrate this incredible milestone we'd worked toward for so long. Instead, I watched from a distance as he posed for photos with his classmates, hugged his friends, laughed and celebrated with people who'd known him for 4 years, while I'd known him for 12. He never once looked around for me, never seemed to remember that I was there. Eventually, I gave up waiting and walked back to my car alone. The drive home to our small apartment, my small apartment now, felt endless, and the silence was deafening. For the first time in 12 years, I didn't have Marcus to center my life around, to plan for, to worry about, to sacrifice for. The apartment felt different when I walked in that night. Marcus's childhood bedroom was exactly as he'd left it when he went to college, but it felt like a museum now, rather than a living space. The Lego creations on his shelves, the science fair trophies on his desk, the photos of us together at various school events, they all seemed to belong to a different life, a different relationship that had apparently meant more to me than it had to him. The next few weeks passed in a blur of profound loneliness and forced self-reflection. Marcus texted me exactly once during that time, a brief message thanking me again for coming to graduation and letting me know he'd been accepted to Johns Hopkins for medical school. The text was polite but distant, the kind of message you might send to a family friend rather than the woman who'd raised you and sacrificed everything for your success. I realized during those lonely weeks that I'd spent so many years defining myself entirely as Marcus's guardian, Marcus's mother figure, Marcus's support system, that I'd completely lost sight of who Sarah was as an individual person. I was 40 years old, with no savings account, no retirement fund, no romantic relationship, no close friendships I'd maintained, and apparently no son who wanted to acknowledge my role in his life or success. But I also realized something else that would prove to be life-changing. For the first time in 12 years, I was completely free to build a life that was entirely my own. The first major decision I made was to go back to school myself. I'd always dreamed of becoming a nurse practitioner, which would give me more autonomy in patient care, better working hours, and significantly better pay than my current position. But I'd never had the time or money to pursue additional education while I was raising Marcus and working multiple jobs to support his college expenses. Now, suddenly I had both the time and the financial motivation to invest in my own future rather than someone else's. I enrolled in a master's degree program at the local university and threw myself into my studies with the same intensity and dedication I'd once devoted to Marcus's needs and goals. For the first time in over a decade, I was learning for myself, pursuing my own dreams, investing in my own future success and happiness. It felt strange and wonderful and slightly terrifying all at once. I'd forgotten what it was like to have personal goals that weren't related to someone else's well-being. I also made another decision that felt revolutionary after so many years of celibacy and social isolation. I started dating for the first time since Marcus had come into my life. I'd barely dated at all during his childhood and teenage years. Between my work schedule and my parenting responsibilities, there simply hadn't been time for romance. And honestly, no man had seemed worth the potential disruption to Marcus's stability and emotional security. But now, for the first time in over a decade, I was genuinely open to the possibility of finding love, of building a relationship based on mutual partnership and support, rather than one-sided caretaking and sacrifice. I met David through a mutual friend at a hospital fundraiser about 6 months after Marcus's graduation. He was a financial advisor who specialized in helping healthcare workers plan for retirement, recently divorced, with 2 teenage daughters he clearly adored and prioritized. He was kind, intelligent, emotionally mature, and genuinely interested in my life, my dreams, my experiences, and my perspective on things. When I told him about Marcus during one of our early dinner dates, about how I'd raised my nephew for 12 years, worked multiple jobs to pay his college tuition, only to be dismissed as just the babysitter at his graduation. David was genuinely appalled by the story. You sacrificed your youth, your financial security, your career advancement, your personal relationships for this kid, and he treats you like hired help in front of his friends. David shook his head in disbelief. That's not just ungrateful behavior. That's genuinely cruel and manipulative. I found myself making excuses for Marcus, as I'd been doing for weeks. Maybe he was just nervous about explaining our complicated family situation, I suggested. Maybe he was embarrassed about his background or worried his friends wouldn't understand. Maybe I was overreacting to what was probably just an awkward moment. But David was firm in his assessment, and his outside perspective was both painful and clarifying. "Sarah, you're making excuses for someone who treated you terribly," he said gently. "A decent person doesn't throw away 12 years of love and sacrifice to avoid having an uncomfortable conversation with acquaintances. What Marcus did wasn't just thoughtless or awkward. It was calculated. He made a conscious choice about how he wanted to present his life story, and you weren't part of the image he wanted to project." Deep down, I knew David was completely right, but admitting that truth meant accepting that I'd wasted the best years of my life on someone who didn't value what I'd given him, and that realization was almost too painful to bear. Meanwhile, the silence from Marcus continued. No phone calls, no texts beyond that single post-graduation message, no updates on his life or his medical school experience. It was as if those 12 years of shared history had never happened. As if I'd been completely erased from his story as cleanly and thoroughly as if I'd never existed in his life at all. Through social media, though I was careful not to check too frequently because it was emotionally painful, I could see glimpses of his new life in Baltimore. His Instagram account showed photos of him in his medical school white coat, studying in the impressive Johns Hopkins Library, grabbing dinner with new classmates at trendy restaurants I could never have afforded. He looked happy, confident, completely absorbed in building his medical career and his adult identity. But I wasn't in any of those photos. I wasn't mentioned in any of his posts. I wasn't part of the success story he was crafting and sharing with the world. The silence hurt more than I'd anticipated or prepared for. For 12 years, Marcus had been my weekly phone call, my primary concern, my greatest source of joy and pride. Now there was just emptiness where that relationship used to be. It was like losing a limb. I kept reaching for something that was no longer there, kept expecting phone calls that never came. About 8 months after graduation, I ran into Mrs. Chen, Marcus's former after-school caregiver, at the grocery store. She'd always been fond of both of us, and her face lit up with genuine pleasure when she saw me browsing the produce section. "Sarah, how wonderful to see you," she said warmly. "How is Marcus doing in medical school? He must be so excited to finally be pursuing his dream of becoming a doctor." "He's doing very well," I said carefully, not wanting to burden this kind woman with the painful details of our estrangement. "Very focused on his studies, working hard as always." "I'm sure he is," Mrs. Chen replied with a knowing smile. "You raised such a dedicated, ambitious boy. You must be incredibly proud of everything he's accomplished. Are you planning to visit him in Baltimore soon? I bet he misses having you nearby." The assumption in her voice, that of course Marcus and I were still close, that of course I'd be visiting him, that of course he missed me, made my chest feel tight with suppressed emotion. "We'll see," I managed to say. "Medical school keeps him pretty busy, so his schedule is quite demanding right now." Mrs. Chen nodded understandingly. "Medical school is incredibly intense," she agreed. "But I'm sure he appreciates everything you sacrificed to get him there. That boy always knew how lucky he was to have you as his mother figure." I smiled and quickly changed the subject to something less emotionally fraught, but her words stayed with me for days afterward. Did Marcus know how lucky he'd been? Had he ever really understood the full scope of what I'd given up for his future? Did it matter to him at all? Or had he simply taken it for granted as something he was entitled to receive? 2 full years passed with no contact whatsoever from Marcus. I finished my nurse practitioner program with honors and got a position at a family practice clinic that offered significantly better hours, better pay, and more professional satisfaction than my previous hospital jobs. For the first time in years, I was working regular daytime shifts with weekends off, earning a salary that allowed me to live comfortably without constantly worrying about money. David and I got engaged after 18 months of dating, and I found myself genuinely excited about building a future with someone who consistently treated me with respect, appreciation, and love. His daughters had accepted me into their family with surprising warmth and enthusiasm, and I was learning what it felt like to be valued and appreciated rather than taken for granted. But there was still an ache where Marcus used to be in my life. I found myself wondering about his progress in medical school, hoping he was happy and successful, missing the young man who used to call me every Sunday to share the details of his week and ask for my advice about everything from academic decisions to relationship problems. Then, on a Tuesday evening while I was at David's house helping his youngest daughter with her algebra homework, my phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar Baltimore area code, but something in my gut told me immediately who was calling. Mom Sarah? The voice was deeper now, more mature and confident, but unmistakably Marcus. I hadn't heard him speak my name in 2 years, and the sound of it brought up a flood of complicated emotions. Love, hurt, anger, longing, resentment, and hope all tangled together in my chest. Marcus, I said, my voice carefully neutral and controlled. How are you? He asked, his tone warm and familiar, as if we'd spoken just last week rather than not at all for 2 years. You sound really good. How was I? I was engaged to a wonderful man, building a successful career, finally living for myself instead of as someone else's support system. But I was also still hurt and confused about how completely he'd written me out of his life after everything we'd been through together. I'm doing well, I said simply. How are you? Really good, he replied enthusiastically. Medical school is incredibly challenging, but I absolutely love it. I'm doing a surgery rotation right now, and it's exactly what I want to do with my life. I'm actually specializing in pediatric surgery, just like I always planned. There was a pause, and I could hear voices in the background, probably his roommates or classmates. Listen, he continued, his tone shifting slightly. The reason I'm calling is that I wanted to let you know I'm getting married. The words hit me like a surprise punch to the stomach. Married. Marcus was getting married, and I was hearing about it through a phone call, not because I'd been involved in his life enough to know he was even in a serious relationship. Congratulations, I managed to say, though my voice sounded strained even to my own ears. That's wonderful news. I'm happy for you. Her name is Jennifer, he continued, his voice brightening with obvious affection. She's a resident too, specializing in pediatric cardiology. Really incredible woman, brilliant, dedicated, kind. We met during our second year and we just clicked immediately. She understands the demands of medical training in a way that most people can't. I'm glad you found someone who shares your passion for medicine, I said, trying to keep my tone warm and supportive despite the hurt I was feeling. The thing is, he continued, we're having the wedding next month and I really wanted to invite you. Jennifer's been asking to meet you for months now. I was quiet for so long that Marcus probably thought the call had been disconnected. Invite me to his wedding? After 2 years of complete silence? After introducing me as just the babysitter to his college friends? Mom Sarah, are you still there? I'm here, I said finally. I'm just surprised to hear from you after so long. I know it's been a while, he admitted, though his tone suggested he didn't really understand why that might be problematic. Things have been absolutely crazy with medical school and residency applications and wedding planning, but Jennifer really wants to meet you. I've told her so much about you over the years. That statement caught my attention and raised obvious questions. What exactly have you told her about me? I asked. There was a pause, as if he was surprised by the question. What do you mean? Well, at your graduation, I was introduced to your friends as just the babysitter who used to watch you when you were a kid. So, I'm curious what version of our relationship you've been sharing with your fiancé. Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear him scrambling mentally for an explanation. Look, that graduation thing was complicated, he said finally. My college friends didn't really understand our family situation, and I didn't want to get into the whole complicated story about my birth mother abandoning me and everything. It was easier to just simplify the explanation rather than having to go into all the messy details. Simpler to erase 12 years of my life and sacrifice, you mean? I said quietly. That's not what I did, he protested. You're being overly dramatic about this, Mom Sarah. Dramatic. The woman who'd worked 70-hour weeks to pay his tuition, who'd lived in poverty for 4 years to ensure his success, was being dramatic for feeling hurt that he'd dismissed her as hired help. Marcus, I said, my voice steady but firm. I haven't heard from you in 2 years. Not a phone call, not a text message, not a birthday card, nothing. You completely cut me out of your life after graduation, and now you want me to come to your wedding? I didn't cut you out, he insisted. I've just been incredibly focused on my medical training. You know how important my career is to me, and medical school is incredibly demanding. I haven't had time for much of anything outside studying and clinical rotations. The casual way he dismissed 2 years of silence, the assumption that I should just be available and understanding whenever he decided he needed me again, made my blood pressure rise noticeably. You're right, I said calmly. Your career is very important. I'm glad all that sacrifice and hard work paid off for you in the end. So you'll come to the wedding then? He asked, apparently missing the edge in my voice entirely. I looked around David's comfortable living room, at his daughter bent over her homework, at the engagement ring on my finger that represented a future built on mutual respect and consistent love. I don't think that's a good idea, Marcus, I said finally. What? Why not? His voice was sharp with surprise and what sounded like genuine confusion. Because I'm not your mother, remember? I'm just the babysitter who used to watch you when you were a kid. And babysitters don't typically get invited to their former charges' weddings unless the family wants to show them off as some kind of cute novelty. Come on, don't be like that, he said, his tone shifting to something that sounded almost like whining. You know you're more than that to me. Do I asked. Because your actions over the past 2 years suggest otherwise. Your behavior at graduation certainly suggested otherwise. I already apologized for the graduation thing, he said defensively. I told you it was complicated and I handled it badly. I was young and stressed and I made a mistake. You didn't apologize, Marcus. You said it was complicated. And you weren't that young. You were 22 years old, which is certainly old enough to know that the woman who raised you and sacrificed everything for your education deserved better treatment than being dismissed as hired help in front of your friends. I could hear him take a shaky breath, and when he spoke again, his voice had a different quality, more emotional, less defensive. Okay, you're absolutely right, he said. I was completely wrong about the graduation thing, and I'm truly sorry I hurt you like that. I'm really, genuinely sorry for how I handled that situation and for not reaching out sooner. But that doesn't mean you have to cut me out of your life completely, does it? I'm not cutting you out of your life, Marcus, I replied. You cut me out of yours. You haven't contacted me for 2 years, and now you want me to drop everything and come celebrate with you when it's convenient for you. That's not fair, he protested. You're right, I agreed. It's not fair. None of this has been fair. But I'm done worrying about what's fair, and I'm focused on what's healthy for me now. So you're just going to refuse to come to my wedding? After everything we've been through together? I'm not refusing anything, I said calmly. I'm just choosing to prioritize my own emotional well-being over being available whenever you decide you need me. There was a long silence on the line. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was different, harder, more defensive, with an edge I'd never heard before. Fine, he said curtly. If that's how you want to be about this, then fine. But don't come crying to me later when you realize you threw away the only real family you have over something stupid like hurt feelings. The only family I have? I had raised him, loved him unconditionally for 12 years, sacrificed my own financial security and personal happiness for his future. I wasn't the one throwing away family here. Whatever, he continued before I could respond. Enjoy your new life, Sarah. I hope it makes you happy. The way he said my name, not Mom Sarah, just Sarah, cold and dismissive, felt like a deliberate slap in the face. I will enjoy it, I said calmly. And Marcus? I hope you learn to treat people better than you've treated me. Jennifer sounds like a lovely person, and she deserves better than someone who discards people when they're no longer useful to him. He hung up without another word. I sat there holding the phone for several minutes, David's daughter still working on her math problems beside me, and felt a strange sense of relief washing over me, despite the emotional pain of the conversation. It hurt. Of course it hurt deeply. But for the first time in 14 years, I felt truly free from the emotional manipulation and one-sided relationship that had defined so much of my adult life. That conversation was 3 years ago now. I married David in a small, intimate ceremony, surrounded by people who genuinely loved and supported me consistently. His daughters walked me down the aisle together, and even David's ex-wife attended the ceremony and reception, telling me afterward that she was grateful her girls had such a positive role model in their lives. It was the first time I'd ever been part of a family where my contributions were consistently acknowledged, appreciated, and valued. I've built a successful nurse practitioner practice that I absolutely love, working with families and children in a way that feels meaningful and rewarding. David and I bought a beautiful house with a big backyard where his daughters can hang out with their friends and we can host family gatherings. We take vacations together, plan for retirement together, make decisions as true partners who respect each other's input and perspective. I've traveled more in the past 3 years than I did in the entire previous decade of my life. I've taken up watercolor painting and learned to play the piano, 2 hobbies I'd always wanted to pursue but never had time for. I've made new friends through my art classes and piano lessons, and I've been able to deepen old friendships that I'd neglected during the years when I was completely focused on Marcus's needs. I've lived more fully and authentically in the past 3 years than I did during the entire time I was raising Marcus and sacrificing everything for his future. Sometimes I still see updates about Marcus's life through mutual acquaintances and social media, though I've been careful not to follow him directly to avoid the emotional roller coaster of seeing his posts. He and Jennifer had what looked like a beautiful, expensive wedding at some exclusive country club in Baltimore. The photos that friends occasionally shared showed an elegant ceremony with dozens of guests, a designer wedding dress, and a reception that probably cost more than I used to make in a year. They're both finishing their medical residencies now and have been accepted into prestigious fellowship programs, Jennifer in pediatric cardiology and Marcus in pediatric surgery, just as he'd always planned. They bought a house in an upscale suburb and adopted a golden retriever named Max. Their social media posts show a life that looks absolutely perfect from the outside. Dinner parties with other young doctors, weekend trips to expensive resorts, professional conferences and medical achievements. 8 months ago, they had their first child, a daughter named Eleanor Rose. She's absolutely beautiful from the photos I've seen, with dark hair like Marcus and what appears to be Jennifer's delicate features and bright smile. The pictures show them as devoted, attentive parents, Marcus holding her with the same gentle care I remember from when he was young and would rescue injured birds we'd find in our neighborhood. His life looks exactly like what I dreamed it could be when he was that scared, abandoned 6-year-old clutching his stuffed elephant and asking if I was going to take care of him. He has everything I helped him achieve: the world-class education, the prestigious career, the financial security, the stable family life, the bright future. He just doesn't have me as part of it. And surprisingly, that reality has become okay with me. It took time and therapy and David's patient support and the gradual realization that I deserve to be valued consistently, not just when it's convenient for someone else. I don't regret the 12 years I spent raising Marcus. Those years taught me what I was capable of, showed me depths of love and sacrifice I didn't know I possessed, and gave me the opportunity to help shape a young person's life in fundamentally positive ways. Watching him grow from that traumatized little boy into a confident, successful adult was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. But I also don't regret walking away when he made it clear that my love and sacrifice were only valued when they served his needs and convenience. That was the hardest lesson I've ever had to learn, but also perhaps the most important. You can love someone completely and unconditionally while still choosing to protect yourself from being taken for granted or treated poorly. Last month, I received a text message from an unknown number When I opened it, I found a photo of baby Eleanor wearing a tiny Harvard onesie and grinning toothlessly at the camera. The message that accompanied the photo said, "Mom Sarah, I know it's been a long time, but I wanted you to meet your granddaughter, Eleanor Rose. She's 8 months old now and just started crawling everywhere. Jennifer and I have been talking a lot about family and what we want for Eleanor's future, and we both agree that we'd love for you to be part of her life. I know I made serious mistakes in how I handled things after graduation, but I'm hoping we can find a way to start over. You deserve to know your granddaughter, and she deserves to know the amazing woman who raised me and made everything good in my life possible. Please think about it." I stared at that photo for a very long time. Eleanor was absolutely gorgeous. She had Marcus's distinctive dark eyes and Jennifer's delicate bone structure, and there was something about her expression that reminded me of Marcus at that age, curious and alert and full of potential. My heart ached with love and longing and 1,000 complicated emotions as I looked at this beautiful child who carried part of the boy I'd raised with so much devotion. Part of me wanted to respond immediately, wanted to drive to Baltimore that very day and meet this little girl who was, in some biological and emotional sense, my granddaughter. I imagined holding her, reading to her, teaching her the same things I'd taught Marcus about kindness and curiosity and resilience. But I also thought carefully about what accepting that invitation would mean in practical terms. Would I be welcomed back into Marcus's life when he needed free babysitting and emotional support, only to be dismissed again when it became inconvenient or embarrassing? Would I be expected to help with childcare costs and time while being excluded from important family decisions and celebrations? Most importantly, would I be able to build a genuine relationship with Eleanor? Or would my access to her be controlled and limited based on Marcus's needs and comfort level? 2 weeks later, I received another text message. "I know you saw my last message about Eleanor. I understand if you need time to think about it, but I wanted you to know that she's getting christened next month, and Jennifer and I would really love for you to be her godmother. We've talked about it extensively, and we both feel strongly that you should have that role in her life. Please don't let my past mistakes keep you from having a relationship with Eleanor. She needs her grandmother in her life." The emotional manipulation in that second message was subtle, but unmistakable. Using my known love for children, applying titles like grandmother and godmother that implied a relationship Marcus had never actually offered me. Suggesting that Eleanor needed me when she was clearly surrounded by loving parents and extended family who could provide for all her needs. I realized that this was the same pattern I'd seen before. Marcus reaching out when he wanted something, first to attend his wedding, now to be part of his daughter's life as a convenient grandmother figure, but only on his terms, and only when it served his purposes. After much consideration and discussion with David and my therapist, I made the difficult decision to delete both messages without responding and to block Marcus's phone number entirely. Some people might think that decision was cruel or heartless, especially when it involved an innocent child who had done nothing wrong. David's daughter certainly struggled to understand it at first. "But she's just a baby," his younger daughter pointed out when I explained the situation. "She didn't do anything to hurt you." "You're absolutely right," I told her. "Eleanor didn't do anything wrong, and I'm sure she's a wonderful little girl who will have a happy, successful life with parents who love her and can provide everything she needs. But her father has shown me a consistent pattern of behavior that tells me any relationship I might have with Eleanor would be conditional on his needs and convenience," I continued. "I can't put myself in the position of becoming attached to a child only to be cut off from her when it's no longer useful to her parents." David's older daughter, who's now in college herself and has a more mature perspective on family dynamics, understood my reasoning better. "You gave Marcus everything and he threw it back in your face when it was convenient," she said. "Now he wants you to risk getting hurt again just because there's a baby involved. That's manipulative, and it's not fair to ask you to do that." "Exactly," I agreed. "I've learned that love without consistent respect isn't really love at all. It's just need, and I'm done being needed by people who don't value what I bring to their lives." 3 months ago, I received one final attempt at contact from Marcus, this time through LinkedIn, since I'd blocked his phone number. The message was much longer and more desperate in tone. Sarah, I know you don't want to hear from me, and I understand why. I've been in therapy for the past year trying to understand why I acted the way I did after graduation and in the years since. I think it was because I was ashamed of my background and afraid that people would think less of me if they knew the truth about my childhood and my unconventional family situation. That's not an excuse for how I treated you, just an explanation. You deserved so much better from me, and I know that now. Eleanor is walking now, and every time she takes a step or learns something new, I think about how you taught me to walk, how you celebrated every milestone in my life, how you were always there, cheering me on. I want her to know you. I want to make this right between us. I'm a different person now, and I think I'm finally mature enough to appreciate what you did for me. Please give me a chance to show you that I've changed, and that I understand how valuable you are. I read that message 3 times, and I'll admit that part of me was genuinely touched by what seemed like authentic remorse and self-awareness, the acknowledgement of his mistakes, the recognition of my sacrifices, the apparent understanding of why his behavior had been hurtful. It all sounded like the kind of growth and maturity I'd always hoped he would develop. But I also noticed what was still missing from his message. There was no acknowledgement of the 2 years of complete silence after graduation. No apology for the financial burden he'd placed on me without any expression of gratitude at the time. No understanding of why his pattern of reaching out only when he needed something was inherently problematic and hurtful. More importantly, I realized that it didn't matter whether Marcus had genuinely changed or not. I had changed too, and I was no longer the woman who would sacrifice her own emotional well-being for the possibility that someone might treat her better this time around. I had built a life that didn't include the uncertainty and emotional volatility of being in Marcus's orbit. I had surrounded myself with people who valued me consistently and treated me with respect as a matter of course, not as a special favor. I had learned to protect my own emotional well-being and to prioritize relationships that were mutually supportive rather than one-sided. I didn't respond to the LinkedIn message either. Instead, I printed it out and brought it to my next therapy session. My therapist read it carefully and then asked me how receiving it had made me feel. Sad, I said honestly. Sad for the little boy he used to be. Sad for the relationship we might have had under different circumstances. Sad for Eleanor, who won't have the chance to know me, but also relieved that I'm no longer responsible for managing his emotions or trying to fix the mistakes he made in our relationship. Do you think you made the right choice in not responding? She asked. I do, I said without hesitation, because even if Marcus has genuinely changed and would treat me better now, I've built a life that doesn't require me to take that risk. I deserve relationships that are consistently loving and respectful, not relationships that might be better this time around. She nodded approvingly. You've learned to protect your own emotional well-being and to set healthy boundaries. That's not selfish. That's essential for your mental health and happiness. And that's exactly where I am today. Healthy, happy, and whole in a way I never was during the years when my entire identity was wrapped up in being Marcus's caretaker and supporter. Marcus will always be part of my story. 12 years of raising him shaped who I am in fundamental and lasting ways. But he's no longer the central character in my story. I am the protagonist of my own life now, for the first time in decades. Sometimes people ask me if I regret not having biological children of my own. The honest answer is no. I don't regret it at all. I did have a child in every way that matters. For 12 wonderful and challenging years, I experienced the profound joy of watching someone grow and develop and discover their potential. I experienced the fierce protectiveness and overwhelming love that comes with being responsible for another person's well-being and future. But I also learned that being a parent, biological or otherwise, doesn't guarantee gratitude, respect, or even basic decency from the person you raise. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for them, is to step back and allow them to live with the consequences of their choices and their character. Eleanor will have loving, devoted parents who can provide for all her needs, emotional, financial, educational, and otherwise. She doesn't need me to have a wonderful life full of opportunities and advantages. Marcus has clearly learned to build a successful, fulfilling life without my involvement or support. Maybe someday he'll teach Eleanor to value and appreciate the people who sacrifice for her well-being. Maybe someday he'll become the kind of person who truly deserves to have me back in his life. But I'm not waiting around to find out whether that growth and change will happen. I'm too busy living my own life, finally and completely and joyfully for the first time in decades. And you know what? It's a truly beautiful life. It really is. The truth is that sometimes the greatest act of self-love and self-respect is walking away from people who take you for granted, even when those people are family members you've loved unconditionally. Learning to protect yourself emotionally isn't selfish or cruel. It's necessary for your well-being and happiness. You can love someone completely while still choosing to prioritize your own emotional health when they consistently treat you poorly. You can be grateful for the positive experiences you shared while still refusing to accept mistreatment in the present. Marcus made his choice at graduation when he decided I was just the babysitter rather than the woman who'd raised and sacrificed for him. I made my choice when I decided I was worth more than being someone's convenient option. And I am worth more than that. We all are. Sometimes love means letting go, especially when holding on requires you to accept less respect and consideration than you deserve. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is teach someone that their actions have consequences, even when that someone is a person you raised and adored. I have no regrets about the life I've built since walking away from that toxic dynamic. It's a life based on mutual respect, consistent appreciation, and love that doesn't have to be earned over and over again. Marcus taught me how to love unconditionally. David and his daughters taught me what it feels like to be loved the same way in return. Both lessons were valuable, but the second one changed my life forever.